introduce each other. We'll do that for the first several meetings so that everybody's on board. Then I have a couple of logistics to talk about, and then we can go from there. But let's go around to the task force members' introductions.
Good morning, my name is Adam DeLucia. I'm Director of the Addison County Regional Planning Commission, and I'm representing the Regional Planning Commission's faculty.
I'm Mitch LaFave. I'm the representative landscape architect from Vermont ASOA.
I'm Billy Coster. I'm helping staff the task force. I'm the director of planning for A&R.
And I'll introduce these guys in a minute.
I'm not on the task force, but I'm a member of the public, but I feel I'm an informed member. I'm Bob Ameline. I used to work at GMP and CDPS, and I have a lot of experience with renewable energy.
Alex Phillips with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, observing for the agency.
Great. And John, we'll see you for a second.
Sharon Murray, I'm the legislative liaison for the Vermont Planners Association. We're a nonprofit organization of most of the professional planners working in the state and also a lot of the planning commissioners working at the local level.
Andy Rob Vogel. I am a member, I'm a board member of Renewable Energy Vermont. I'm also an attorney, and I am representing Renewable Energy Vermont.
Great. And on the phone, joining us, for those who didn't know, Linda McGinnis had to resign for other personal reasons, but Sam Swanson was appointed by the joint position that was in the statute from VNRC and the Beatberg. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Sam Swanson, and I serve I'm representing, I guess, the public perspective. And in my energy life, I play several roles. I'm senior policy advisor at the PACE Energy and Climate Center. That's my paid job. I serve as president of Vermont Interfaith Power and Light, an advocacy group that's organized around supporting the diverse communities of faith in Vermont in addressing the challenge of change. I also serve on the South Burlington Energy Committee, and as a member of that committee and its efforts to pursue the Georgetown University Energy Prize competition reducing energy use in the city of South Burlington. I've been working in energy renewables and energy efficiency for most of my professional life. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate and join this distinguished group of people dealing with a difficult but interesting problem.
Thanks, Sam, very much. Noelle has joined us. Do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Noelle McKay. I'm the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. Sorry, I'm late. One of those days where...
Yep, that's okay. So there are several staff in the room. First of all, I note that we do have a quorum because we have 8 members, including myself here. 9. There we go. Robert Justice from GMP. So let me just introduce some staff here as well. Joining us recently is John Copans, our Deputy Commissioner, and Asa Hopkins, who's running the Planning and Energy Resource Division of the department, and also working on the Comprehensive Energy Plan, and has done a lot of work on this, and is going to be making a presentation, so you get a better sense of where solar stuff is. Ann Margolis, who's our kind of advocate for helping on renewables, and new to this, so be nice to her, is Ann Tyrell, who is my new executive assistant, and she is going to be taking minutes, and because she doesn't know any of you except for the staff, it would be helpful when you talk, you could indicate your name, and that will help Sam as well because he's on the phone. So a couple of logistics today. We attempted to email the agenda out to everybody who expresses interest in doing this, but we couldn't read a couple of the email addresses, so if you didn't get noticed, maybe you didn't, and you were here last time, if you could sign up on the list, print the email clearly, and if you just left a phone number last time, if you don't have an email address, just if you could indicate that you don't have an email or you won't be contacted that way, that's fine. But let's take a moment to go around the room too to find out who's here. And if it's okay, I'll start at the upper right-hand corner here.
Right. Last one to rock, George Gross.
Exactly. There you go, George. Thanks.
Harold Abelock of Charlotte. Peter Rothschild. Hey, Peter. Leonard Duffy of Heinsberg.
Chris Violet, Town of Erie.
Andrea Cohen, Vermont Electric Co-op. Kathleen Nelson, Town of Brighton.
John Lewandowski, Newark.
Keith Alex Sheffield.
Dana Hanley, I'm the planning director for the town of Essex and also a member of the Vermont Planners Association.
Ben Eastwood from up here.
Jeannie Oliver, Department of Public Service.
Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Dylan Zwicky, KSE.
Gabrielle Stebbins, Renewable Energy Vermont.
Jeff Hand with Dunkiel Saunders.
Lincoln Landy with Grow Solar.
Rod Viennes from Grow Solar.
Johanna Miller, Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Elizabeth Cooper, Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
Ryan Garvey, VPERC.
David Raphael from Landworks in the town of Canton.
Laura Trushman, I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer.
Thank you all. So we have an agenda before us, and Deb Markowitz.
Sorry, I'm late.
That makes full contingent. So just about to review the agenda, there are paper copies if people need them. There's also paper copies of the draft minutes, which we'll go over in a minute. What we figured we could do based on the last meeting that we had was we'd spend a bulk of time today getting an introduction to the state energy goals and options and the implications for solar land use that ASA will be presenting. We're also, David Raphael also offered to try and provide some solar aesthetics guidance at this meeting. And so we're going to do that too. We'll have questions, time for questions and answers on those two things. Then we're going to spend some time with public comment for anyone who wants to weigh in from the audience. And then discuss future meetings and topics and schedule for another 20 minutes. So I'm hoping you all brought calendars with you or have them memorized so you know when you're available, when you're not, so we can figure that out, because I think it is most efficient to try and figure out meetings going forward as best we can when we're all together, rather than trying to do it by email or poll. And that way everybody in the room also knows what the decisions are. Anyone have any other suggestions for the agendas or changes that they would like? Yes. Yeah.
There's a sign-in sheet down there at the end of the table with a check mark if you want to do a public comment. And everyone got that, so if somebody down there wants to start circulating it around.
Do you need task force members to sign on this?
No.
Only if you want to make a comment. We'll let you talk eventually. Okay, great. Any other logistics that I'm forgetting, please? Okay. So before we get ACE's presentation, I did want to just acknowledge that Sam, is our new task force member. He introduced himself a little bit before. We do have, Linda was also elected as vice chair last time, so we have to come up with another vice chair. And with that in mind, I will. And by the way, Sam would have been here, but this meeting was scheduled before he was appointed, and he wasn't able to make changes to his schedule. So, so I guess I would open up the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Sam Swanson.
This is always a danger, Sam. Okay, so we have Robert and Deb. Second. Any other nominations? Sam, you have to come off mute and tell us whether you're willing to accept this nomination.
Oh, he's there, huh?
Yes, he is. Oh, right, I know. It's not quite as effective as it normally is when they're not in the room, but. Sam, are you there? Are you fainted?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
I thought I had yes, I accept the nomination. I'm sitting outside a hospital. Got this on mute. Ambulances are going by.
Right. Okay. Well, great. Thank you. So no other nominations, and he's willing. So can I get a vote? All those in favor of Sam being vice chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Sam's on mute, so he couldn't oppose. All right, so thanks. And with that, let's oh, thank you. I skipped right over that. Okay, so we've got the 7:28 minutes. My apologies. Thank you. That's why we need 6 other people in this room to help me manage this. So the minutes were drafted and posted on the web within 5 days of the meeting, but we need to act on them, make them official. So anyone have a motion, accept a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Sharon?
Sharon?
I'll second Noel.
Well, great. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Sam, I'm going to put you down as an abstention because you weren't here for that, if that's okay. I'm considering that okay. Okay, very good. Okay, we had a couple of more people join us in the room. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Jill DeVoe. I'm from New Haven, and I thought for sure I'd be early to this one. Sorry.
I'm Michael Hamish. I'm a reporter for Geeky Digger.
Yeah, I was going to say there are a couple of chairs. You guys are welcome to sit at the table if you need, for a seat if you want.
Thank you.
As long as you understand, as long as you recognize it when we're voting and stuff. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Asa Hopkins to walk us through our energy goals and kind of put the solar piece of this in context for everybody. Can everybody see this okay? It will get bigger. Sam, and I'm sorry, I know you can't see this.
So I understand I have about 45 minutes or so. I'm happy to take interruptions and questions from members of the task force as we go. Discussion questions. I have 15 slides. It shouldn't. My part shouldn't take the whole time. So I'm happy to discuss and answer questions as we go. So I'm going to try to cover some range of the state's energy goals as they relate to solar, and then some analysis that's been done here and elsewhere on sort of general questions of sort of the aggregate scale of land use as relates to solar PV. So first, just to put some of this in context, we do have a comprehensive energy plan. We will very shortly issue a public review draft of an update to that plan. But generally speaking, that plan gives our department, and in fact, the person who sits in my seat in particular, the responsibility to publish a plan that advances state energy policy. We do have a state energy policy summarized here about adequate, reliable, secure, and sustainable energy that's affordable and encourages economic vitality, that uses energy resources efficiently and manages demand cost effectively, and that is environmentally sound. We also, of course, have to take into account all of the other state law that is relevant on this topic, like greenhouse gas reduction goals and renewable energy goals and requirements. So just to put, step back all the way up to the high end, energy in Vermont today. This is a chart showing the breakdown by different fuels and different sectors using those fuels of how we use energy in Vermont in total. Electricity is the largest single quote-unquote fuel, although of course electricity itself comes from many different fuels. But as from the end user's perspective, But gasoline, distillates, both heating oil and diesel for transportation, propane for heat, those are all petroleum products, and those together are well over half of the total. Some amount of natural gas, and then wood for heat. You see how the breakdown by sector. Transportation is all about gasoline and diesel. Residential, you see the diversity of different sources of heat in the state. Commercial is a little bit more electric heavy than residential. In terms of breaking this down in terms of overall percent renewable, we get about 20% of the state's heat from renewable sources, predominantly wood at the moment. Our mobility is about 6% renewable. That's basically the ethanol and gasoline. And our power is about 45% renewable. I have a chart that breaks that down in a moment. But overall, across from a total energy perspective, we're about 16% renewable. This is in the context then of a comprehensive energy plan goal established last time, which we expect to reaffirm in the updated plan, of getting that number from 16 to 90% by 2050. That goal.
Sam? When he lost us.
Yeah, when it rings, that's right.
Thanks.
You're the one saying that. This 90% goal is consistent with those other goals, as I mentioned. Reflects a strong desire among Vermonters to be energy secure, energy independent, to ensure stable prices, and as much as possible to rely on resources indigenous to Vermont. We don't have local fossil fuel resources.
Welcome back.
Or nuclear fuel resources, and so the resources indigenous to Vermont are renewables. Obviously, we're trying to do our part to mitigate climate change, meeting the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. And also there's related to that indigenous resources piece is that moving to a more efficient and more renewable energy mix helps keep more money local, resulting in a state economic benefit. The draft CEP to be issued shortly will propose establishment of goals for 2025 in order to give ourselves a little bit more of a near-term target rather than only 35 years out, of being 25% renewable, up from 16%, as I said, in the context of a 15% reduction in total energy use from efficiency, conservation, and from more efficient generation. There is a statutory target already established for 25% by 2025, so this embraces that target. Broken out by sector, that means for building heat, 30% up from 20, mobility 10% up from 6, and power 67% up from 45. The 67% is directly compatible with the renewable energy standard established in Act 56, which is summarized here. That renewable energy standard has 3 tiers. Tier 1 is a sort of overall total renewable requirement, starting at 55% in 2017, rising to 75% in 2032, going through the mid-60s in the mid-2020s. There's provisions there that, while that requirement would explicitly be 3% in 2025, both Burlington Electric and Washington Electric are expected to take account of a provision there that would expect them to be 100% renewable, and that pulls the overall state average up a little bit. That tier is very permissive in terms of what kind of resources count. If it's renewable, whether it's in Canada or New York or Massachusetts or Vermont, it would count if it's renewable under Vermont law. All of these involve the tracking and retirement of renewable energy credits, RECs. So utilities need to own RECs corresponding to that percentage of their retail sales. Tier 2 of the renewable energy standard is about new distributed generation, new meaning online after July 1st of this year, and distributed generation meaning less than 5 megawatts and connected to the distribution system. There are some fallback provisions if this can't be met that would allow somewhat larger generators. That provision starts at 1% of sales in 2017 and rises to 10% of sales in 2032. That corresponds to something like in the 400s megawatts of new generation, depending on the mix of what kind of generators relate to that. If it were all solar PV, it would be in the mid 400s for the context of this grouping. And then tier 3 is an energy transformation tier, in which utilities will work with their customers to reduce fossil fuel use. This is given that some of the dominant pathways there are adoption of electric co-pilot heat pumps or electric vehicles, both of which would result in an increase in electric use. This is likely to result in a net increase in electric use, although the weatherization of buildings and coupling electric efficiency may moderate that somewhat. We don't know exactly what utilities will do on this yet, so it's a little bit uncertain. Net impact. So thinking then about where we are today in terms of our electric portfolio, on the left, this is 2014 numbers, on the left is what our portfolio looks like before anybody has bought or sold any RECs, and on the right is what it looks like after anybody has bought or sold any RECs. You'll see that the hydropower number actually goes up because when folks are buying RECs, they tend to buy hydropower RECs. And then the wind, wood, methane, solar fractions go way down. I should note that these are utility portfolios and do not account for net metering. So solar that is sort of self-supplied in the net metering context is not accounted for here and would be on the scale of 1%.
Lisa, can I ask, as you go forward, is the intent to count that separately under tier 1 or 2, or is it to, since it's net metering behind the meter, is it counting toward efficiency? Could you explain that?
Yeah, so under tier 2, utilities need to own RECs. That's, this whole structure is about, for tiers 1 and 2 is about utilities owning RECs or having rights to RECs. The net metering customers today are given the option whether to keep the RECs themselves or transfer them to the utility, and some customers do either. The bulk of customers keep the RECs at the moment. The board is in the process of redesigning, the Public Service Board is in the process of redesigning net metering for 2017 and beyond. And one of the things that they're supposed to do there is to differentiate in treatment within net metering for whether a project assigns its RECs to utility or not. So it is expected, although we don't know exactly how the market will respond, that a lot of folks doing net metering going forward will get some sort of a higher level of compensation from the utility for their net metering in exchange for the utility having the RECs and then the RECs counting for tier 2. We have yet to work out the exact details about how different kinds of net metering count with respect to retail sales in terms of calculating the denominator for these fractions. The board will have to work through that in their rulemaking. So just to say that once we're in that context and we're talking, then utilities will count and record, and we will be able to have accounting for RECs corresponding to all different scales of generators, net metered and not net metered, for solar. And so I would expect there needs to be a wedge by 2032 that's 10% big in the chart on the right that corresponds to tier 2 eligible projects, and those will be net metered and not net metered as long as they're all the RECs are, the utility has the RECs and they're all 5 megawatts or smaller.
And Asa, can I ask a question? It looks like tier 2, or chances are it's going to be all in state. Tier 1 could be in state or out of state or anywhere else.
Yes. Yeah. Tier 2 is explicitly intended. Well, it's structured as generation connected to a distribution system, the Vermont utility distribution system, or part of a project that reduces Vermont transmission costs. So it's very highly likely to be located in Vermont. There's a grid operational justification for that in the statute. But yes, we basically expect the tier 2 to be in Vermont.
About 400 megawatts?
400 and something.
And we have about how much of it right now?
Well, I'll get to that in a moment. There was another question.
Can you go to the next slide? It was the, sorry, I guess I missed what you said, how the right-hand pie chart would change as,
Well, two things are going to happen as this comes into effect. One is that the green part of the pie has to be at least 55% of the total, rather than its current 45% of the total, which will mean acquiring, either not selling some of these recs or acquiring other ones to replace them to have the green be bigger generally.
Right.
Separately, we'd be able to look and have sort of break out sort of tier 2 eligible small things. And that could be solar or wood or small hydro or what have you, and have it. We'll start to have a wedge that's tier 2 eligible recs that are really in the utility portfolio, and then we'll start at 1% and grow to 10% over that next 15 years or so.
And I apologize if you already explained this, but what falls under the unspecified?
Unspecified is basically generic market power, which is mostly natural gas.
So it's fossil fuel.
It's fossil fuel. Fossil fuel, nuclear, sort of, it's just whatever is just sort of generically selling into the grid in time.
So that is spot market purchases.
Well, or bilateral market agreements utilities might have, but which are just for the delivery of market power.
Got it. Yeah.
It's likely to be in the region. It's likely to be significantly natural gas.
And a little bit of oil and a little bit of coal in there. This wedge, what we call uncovered renewable, essentially, from an environmental standpoint, becomes that mix, that residual mix, in terms of what we can claim when we sell. If we sell a rec, and what we're left with is just sort of generic, unclaimed whatever's left. Well, that's that whatever's left is the rest of that mix. So just distinguishing between this unspecified, which doesn't change, and this uncovered renewable, which corresponds to the recs that were sold and are no longer they're compensated. I think it rings when we lose the connection.
If you would like to make a call, please.
Sam will presumably call back.
Should I
answer it?
It's the vice chair. Yeah. So looking at what we've got today, most of this, I should say, is not Tier 2 eligible because it was online before July 1st of this year, or it's not even online yet. So just to say that right now there's about 120 megawatts of solar capacity installed, and about another 75 megawatts that is in process of some sort. Formal process, in the sense of a 45-day notice has been filed, the CPG application has been filed, and sort of that kind of level of progress.
And you said it was 400 and something.
400 and something by 2032, and the entire 75 that's in process will all be eligible. Because if it's not yet permitted, it eventually comes online. It will come online after July 1st of this year and would be an eligible resource.
Sorry, Asim,
so I have a question for the chair.
Yes, should we do questions from the audience now or later?
If they're limited, later.
Right.
It's not a comment, it's a clarification.
Here, let me rule so that everybody understands. Besides, I like to do rulings. So if it's a clarifying question because it's a piece you don't understand, we can do that. Let's hold comments though until the end. Okay.
No, it's not a comment. It's a clarification.
Very good.
For when you're representing this as solar built today, is this solar that has been built, for example, by out-of-state developers who have owned the RECs and take it with them? Whose RECs are involved in this?
I'll describe that a little bit as I describe each of the pieces and try to get some clarity. So this is a sort of a cumulative capacity chart. So there are about 195 megawatts total. So that's the upper right, and then so the cumulative capacity counts up as we go, and this is the size of generator capacity in kilowatts, so 5 megawatts here on the right. The first data point here is systems 20 kilowatts and smaller, and so that's already 31 megawatts. So that's your basically your residential scale net metering system. Those are, as I said, mostly those customers have retained the RECs, although some of them have assigned the RECs to utility. There's some amount of various sizes of systems that sort of scatter through the 25 and 50 and 100 kilowatts. There's a large block of projects at the 150 kilowatt scale, about, squinting here, 17, 20 megawatts.
I'm going to ask, but how many panels is that? Or does it
I have
depend
no
on
idea.
the system?
I have no idea by panel wise.
Or by
Well,
I'll get to
each panel generally has been about 250 watts. There are some that are bigger, you know, the 2 by 3 foot panels, but we have to do the math, and ASA doesn't want to be doing any math.
150 is about an acre.
Right, 150 is about an acre. So roughly speaking, the numbers I have is it's roughly 7 acres a megawatt. So 7 times 150 is a little over a megawatt. So 150 is about an acre. 500 kilowatts is 3.5 acres. So there's a chunk, 30 megawatts or so of 150 kilowatts. There's a chunk, 30 megawatts or so of 500 kilowatt systems. There's a scattering of a couple 1 megawatt systems, 1.5. This sort of quick rise around 2 is the standard offer program. And then there are a few recent proposals for projects up in the 4.5 to 5 megawatt range. So those are round out the top. In terms of treatment of RECs, for 150s and 500s, those are, the RECs belong to the customer unless they've assigned them to the utility. And so, depending on what the deal is between an off-taking customer and the project developer, those RECs may be going, assigned to that customer and now allowing them to make renewable energy claims, or they may be aggregated up by a developer and sold. The standard offer projects and the PPAs, utility PPAs, 1 megawatt and above, those are all systems in which the energy and the RECs go to the utility. And the utilities will do what they will with those RECs. Some of them are retained, I think, and some of them are sold. The standard offer projects coming online after July 1st of this year would be Tier 2 eligible. Starting in 2017, so expect that some fraction of this, as well as future development down here, would be RECs that would be retained by the utilities and used for compliance. My understanding is that these large projects, Robert could correct me, but these are if these come online in 2016 and there's no requirement until 2017, the REC might be sold for that year for ratepayers' benefit. But when there is a requirement, there needs to be so many RECs, and they're going to come from the generators where they come from. Utilities might, of course, or others may build projects further faster than the state REC retirement requirements are, and then they would have some amount of excess with which they could work in the REC markets or retain those and be that much more renewable.
But then the following year with a higher
with a rising requirement, eventually you would need those RECs to come. There's likely given the federal tax credit system falling off after 2016, there's likely to be some amount of excess, as of projects coming on in 2016. And the 2017 requirement might not use all of that up, but the 2018 or 19 requirement likely will. And by the time you're into the 2020s, you're really needing to build more new stuff. So going back to the big picture, now this is all about the present, so what about the future? And not just the Tier 2 future, but a bigger picture than that. So we did some modeling for the total energy study that resulted in a scenario that, this is a scenario, it's not a prediction, it's not a plan, it's just a sense of directionally how we might be able to achieve our goals. This is total energy on the left-hand side here, showing a sharp decline in total energy use over that time period. This is both, as I said, efficiency and conservation, efficiency and end use, using much more efficient appliances, things like electric vehicles that use a lot, you go 3 times as far on a given unit of energy. And then combine that with electricity that's coming from non-combustion sources, and so you're not sending, or at least CHP type systems, where so you're not wasting a bunch of heat, you're not sending a bunch of heat up a smokestack. And so this total primary energy counts that heat. If we're moving away from combustion-based sources, or we're capturing that combustion heat, then we're much more in a position to have the total go down. We're squeezing the waste out of the total energy system. The big picture, building non-electric building heat falling significantly, electric building heat, which is the blue piece, coming up significantly, that's heat pumps, transportation electrification from basically nothing to being a substantial contributor. But basically this smaller dark purple piece replaces a much larger light purple piece because of how much more efficient electric vehicles are than their internal combustion predecessors. In terms of then what this means for electricity, it means going from total use in the 5 to 6 terawatt-hour range per year now, then that growing up into about the 9 terawatt-hour per year level by 2050, maybe 7 or so by the 2032 time frame, right, accounting for the fact that there are some amount of line losses and such. So just some general sense that building heat and transportation, if we really do electrify, which is basically your options for getting 90% renewable are electrify and use renewable electricity, or use wood and liquid biofuels. And there are economic reasons and efficiency reasons for preferring the electric path to the wood and biofuel path, except where necessary, or heavy-duty trucks may not electrify. Therefore, you might want to do something else in that sector.
I said, this does not show or demonstrate, but this does not suggest that higher bar is coming from the utility, because I see a lot of that being met with.
Could be self-supplied.
Right.
Right. Yeah. This is demand met from whatever source. Or it could be supplied by the utility, could be supplied by the customer. The coincident, we'll have to work on coincident timing to what extent that exists between distributed generation and the loads. At the times of greatest heat pump heating need, it's not very sunny. We may end up actually charging EVs not so much overnight, but instead in the middle of sunny afternoons, depending on the dynamics of the grid. So for the comprehensive energy plan, we looked at 3 different mixes of potential renewables that would get to 9 terawatt hours. That's the size of the bar on the right. Just to see some sense of what different portfolios might look like. Obviously, 3 of these bars, the methane, biomass, and small hydro bars, don't even change at all across this. They could change up or down a bit, and it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference in the overall scale. The actual size of the resources there are not that large to change those numbers that much one way or the other.
Can you just remind us quickly where we are now for each one of those?
Yes. I think my mouse will work. I can use this pointer, but right now in solar, as I said, we're at the sort of 120 on our way to 200 kind of range. Wind, there's about 100 megawatts in state and about 100 megawatts out of state. Very roughly. We are about there at methane. Biomass, we're at about 70 now. Basically McNeil plus Reigate. Small hydro, that's where we are. And large hydro, we get to about 220 megawatts, but only 16 hours a day. So these are all sort of round-the-clock assumptions. sort of full capacity factor assumptions here.
Would you be able to what's in Sept and then so I could see it?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
that would be really helpful.
It's reflected in the next slide. But just since we're talking about solar PV, in this particular context, these scenarios imagine something between 1,500 and 2,250 megawatts of solar serving Vermont by 2050.
Can I ask you a question?
Clarify only.
Clarify, yeah. On some of these, like solar and wind, you're talking about the productivity. These are goals, right? Or what it's producing right now, but can you compare it to the actual plate value, what it would take to achieve the 750?
These are nameplate numbers.
They are nameplate
Nameplate megawatt numbers, with the assumption of 16% capacity factors for solar, 33 for wind, and
That's kind of, yeah, some of those, they're not exact. I mean, some of them are
Okay,
lower,
thanks.
but- Okay.
I mean, they do reflect capacity factors
Those
that are.
are typical capacity factors, and those are the ones that are used for this analysis. So for the purposes of sort of actually just stating what those numbers are for the analysis. For methane large hydro, basically around the clock, biomass about 2/3, and small hydro about 45% or so, run a river.
And these are the numbers that are in the draft
Right.
comprehensive energy plan,
Right.
and the assumptions are laid out as to how those numbers were received. And that comprehensive energy plan will be public soon and open for comment, draft,
Yeah,
right?
and it's also, you
Just
know,
wanna-
backed up with, you know, it's from EIA data, it's from, you know, experience.
No, I know, I'm
So
just letting
there's
folks know that
documentation.
there's an opportunity here.
Plenty
There's an opportunity to
more
comment.
opportunity to have this conversation. Just to say that these are three scenarios, you know, there's no preferred scenario, the future will not, I'm sure, look like any one of these, but just to say that these are three different things that each produce 9 terawatt hours of electricity, we can make the capacity factor assumptions that we make. In terms of what those look like, in terms of sort of, these are purposely, I used the squiggly line feature on Excel, right, to show that this is, you know, these are sort of generally, so the three with dash lines just are effectively constant. I should need to check the biomass. I think I assumed that the biomass's capacity factor increased over time. We've seen that effect in the market now, where McNeil runs a much harder fraction of the time now than it did in the past. Solar basically non-existent in 2000 and 2010, comes up off the zero line for the 2015 set. The 2032 numbers here are set so that they are 3/4 of the expected sales, of the expected demand at that time, in line with the 75% renewable goal requirement for 2032, and then on their way to 2050. So the first scenario is a sort of solar and wind heavy, large hydro sort of stays about where it has been historically. This fall from 2010, 2015 is the new Hydro-Quebec contract that's only 16 hours a day instead of 24 hours a day, and so it's only 2/3 as big as it used to be. I should say that in that large hydro number, that we also get some amount from NIPA, so there are other things in there too.
Lisa, question please. On the large hydro, you said 100%, you're figuring that, but wasn't the VGO contract at a 75% annual capacity factor?
My understanding that the original Hydro-Quebec contract was around the clock contract, the one that we're coming off of, and the one that we're going into is a 16-hour a day peak contract.
The original one is at 75% annually. We scheduled it at 100% at certain times, but by the year, but it's 75%.
But looking at the solar line that's had come off of zero for where we are basically now. This is I think it's 140 megawatts or something is the number that I put in here for now. Goes rises and then further up to 2050. Other scenarios have more imports, more large hydro, much less wind, the same amount of solar, or more large hydro, the same amount of wind as this scenario, but less solar. So it's just there are three different pieces that can be combined in various ways. In terms then of what the land use impacts of those different scenarios are, as we said, we assume 7 acres a megawatt, noting that if solar panels went from, say, 20% efficient to 23% efficient, that means a megawatt is 6 acres instead of 7. So there's some amount of technological improvement that will affect the land use piece in the longer term. But I'm just using 7.
So what it is currently, and then we're conservative.
It ought to get smaller per megawatt as technology advances, but you don't have a model case for that, and just simpler to just be able to multiply by 7.
And those, those figures are without regard to whether it's in Vermont or not in Vermont. This is the acreage that would be needed to meet those goals.
Right. Yeah. This is the total megawatts. This this generation mix would meet our needs. The large hydro is not here.
And you're not assuming
not necessarily assuming that it would be here, but just to give you a sense of scale. Generally speaking, solar is more likely to be closer to its, given where the resources are. It generally shines in a lot of places. It seems that more likely over time that the solar serving a particular area might be closer to that area than would be wind or hydro that would serve that same area. Clarifying question?
How many hours a day is this?
I've assumed a 16% capacity factor for solar. So the 2032 and 2050 numbers that went into these scenarios, the 2032 have between 500 and 750 megawatts of solar. If you assume that that some fraction of that is on structures, and that the question of how you get that to happen or not is one of the things perhaps before you all. But it is something that in the department's proposal for net metering redesign, for example, would propose putting a thumb on the scale in the favor of development on structures, for example. So if you were to assume that about a third to 40% of that total were on structures, then remaining is 300 to 500 megawatts, which multiplied by 7-ish is about 2,000, 3,500 acres-ish.
So I know we had talked about putting the thumb on the scale for not just structures, but brownfield sites or decommissioned gravel sites or parking lots, and is that structures include all of that?
No.
Okay.
No, it's just this number is a way of you subtract these out, multiply by 7, and get that.
No,
right. So depending on what you mean this to be, acres of what? You mean acres of greenfield? In which case, you're all the other stuff is in the other category.
Yeah,
Do you mean acres of land, not on a building? Then you mean the other. Like it could be acres of parking lot.
Right.
Right.
So that's good. I think that's a good for us to think about in terms of if you're looking at that like 2,000 acres or 3,500 acres. What are the acreage that we have available through parking lots and all of those other more desirable locations versus some areas that have more concern or more rubs with other uses?
So describe the next piece and then give a little bit of context. The 2050 scenarios, as you saw, between 1,500 and 2,250 megawatts. I've assumed that now that the structures piece only goes up to about 350. That's driven by some analysis informed by NREL and some analysis that BSC is doing that only about a quarter of residential buildings are suitable for solar PV. The ridge line runs north-south. There's a big tree. All sorts of it's an apartment building. All sorts of things that don't work for solar PV. So if you imagine basically 250,000 households, 5 kilowatts each, but then divide by 4, that's about where you end up. So that number is structures, which does not necessarily count commercial buildings and such. But yeah, so, George, you had to clarify my question?
Do you have any assumptions about energy storage in this? Starting to roll for it?
No, I don't. I haven't. Yeah, I think all of this will work a whole lot better with either some reasonable amount of energy storage, whether it's electrical or thermal, and also some amount of controllable loads, which the controllable loads, thermal storage are sort of the same kind of thing, the kind of places where you're controlling a water heater or something like that. Is like that's a controllable load. It's also it's controllable because it's got a thermal mass to work with. They haven't worked through the sort of storage grid operations side of this, recognizing that this is looking at resources that are either historically or physically available in Vermont, operating in the context of a regional grid with its interconnections to Canada and New York, where on this time scale we might have a certain amount of offshore wind and other things that are playing in that grid, that there could be net flows at different times between states. We already have that. We already have net flows at different times between states. So,
do you have the land cover data information with the actual numbers of how many structures are there in the state of Vermont?
I'll give some scale, a very rough sense of some of that in a minute. That first structures number is based on basically 250,000 residential scale buildings, which is, all this is sort of all, because it's this big range, it's all plus or minus 50 kind of analysis, just to give you a sense of scale. So if you take that 350 megawatts out of this total, you're left with sort of 8,000 to 13,000 acres that's not on a structure. If we're currently at about 1,000 acres, if you measure it, we're sort of, or at least 1,000 acres that are sort of already somewhere in the process. The sites have been determined, that notices have been filed, whatever. We're roughly in that range. So 7,000 to 12,000 more acres spread out over 35 years. That's 200 to 350 acres a year spread out over that time.
I have a question, clarifying question. We had done an analysis from a different angle, which was to look at tier 2, and if it were met all by solar, how many acres would that be? It's a very different number from this. This is departing, if I understand correctly, from the 9 terawatt hours, of which in 3 scenarios there's some part of which is met by solar, and therefore there's acreage, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're really different. One is like 3,500 and the other, but that was 2032.
Roughly speaking, the tier 2 alone world is close to the 500 megawatts in 2032 world.
Okay.
So like this sort of 2,000 acres in 15 years.
So that would be another 1,000 acres.
So another 1,000 acres.
1,500 acres.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If this number is up,
Right.
again, this number currently is not like, we may be halfway to this number, but we're not halfway to that number. We haven't, there's more development fractionally happening not on buildings than on buildings.
And that's why
we're thinking about that
putting
on
this on.
scale.
Yep, okay.
So for just some scale of what does, I was just working with this myself trying to understand, all right, what is 13,000 acres? What is 2,000 acres on the scale of what's around us? What would 200 to 350 acres a year mean in terms of pace of change? So just scale, Vermont is 5.9 million acres. There are 255 towns, cities, villages, and gores. So that averages out to 23,000 acres per each one of those. There are about 160 million square feet of commercial buildings in the state. Now, some of those are multiple stories and whatever, but roughly speaking, if you just turn that number of square feet into acres, you're in the 3,600-ish acres range. If you assume, if every commercial building has a parking lot that's about as big as the building is, maybe there's about that much parking lot space, but I don't think we actually have a good count on that. I think I saw some slides from people doing LiDAR analysis that you could actually do a land use assignment from LiDAR, and you could actually count up exact acres of a lot of this kind of stuff that way. But just for sense of scale, 3,500 acres, which is sort of the 750 megawatts in 15 years number, that 3,500, that's on the scale of the commercial buildings in the state. If you take the total miles of road in the state, 14,266 miles of road, and assume they're all 25 feet wide, that's 43,000 acres. So if you just sort of think, all right, over 200 years, we've built 43,000 acres of road. That's about 200 acres a year. Obviously, that happened more at some times than others. But in terms of sort of pace of growth, over the long time, it's sort of in that ballpark. There are 381,000 acres of ag soils in the state. So, the other way to think about this, even if you put all 12,000 acres of additional 2050 target on prime ag.
Just say that,
Just saying.
Just
saying.
Or you can put it all in the commercial buildings and on the parking lots.
Right. It would be about a little more than 3% of the prime ag.
Is that in production prime ag, or is it prime ag that's available that might have something built on top of it?
It's that.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
So we might want to put that
But
caveat
on the scale of all the commercial buildings and houses and whatever in the state are themselves small compared to that number too, right? So you could take out all the things that are covering that prime ag, and it would still be a pretty big number. Roads that are driving across them. Soils of statewide significance are another 961,000 acres.
Let's put it in perspective.
Also, the different kind of comparison, Massachusetts is 5 million acres, we're 6. They already have 923 megawatts of solar deployed. Obviously, a lot of that's on buildings, but if you just took that and multiplied by 7, they would have something like 6,000. There's about 6,000 or so acres of Massachusetts that are already. Obviously, Massachusetts has a somewhat different land use pattern than we do, but the western half of Massachusetts isn't so different. So just for context, Massachusetts already deployed more than our target for 2032. Obviously, that's a bigger number of people, bigger load, but just to put us in a national or at least a regional context. I want to show a piece here in a moment that's an intermediate product from some work that we are doing, have sponsored with 3 RPCs, Bennington, Two Rivers, and Northwest. But they've been able to, they're doing GIS analysis. All the layers are statewide, so they've been able to give us some amount of statewide data as well. So they looked at the state, and they took out first they said, what's a good solar site? It's flat enough, it has reasonable southern exposure, etc. And then took out FEMA floodways, river corridors, wilderness areas, rare and irreplaceable natural areas, vernal pools, class 1, 2, and 3 wetlands, deer wintering areas, special flood hazard areas, conserved lands, hybrid soils, habitat blocks that are greater than 2,000 acres, and any local, time, or statewide classified agricultural soils. So took all of that out, and what's left in the state is 342,000 acres. So those are sites that are places that are good for solar and are not any of this, and they are about 30 times as much as we might possibly need at the high end in 2050. In the analysis where they've completed this analysis, 42% of that land is within a mile of a 3-phase power line, in terms of actually also then being reachable in a reasonably economic way to actually connect to the grid.
And that's still 3 times the amount that we need.
Right, and that's only in 3 counties.
Right, exactly, yeah, okay.
Right.
So but the first number statewide, or is that just?
The first number is statewide.
Okay.
So the 3 RPCs have, whatever that would be, 70 or 80,000 acres that in that first category, of which 42% are within a mile of the 3-phase line. I'll show a map of Bennington County in a moment.
They haven't backed out existing structures.
Right, they have not backed out existing structures for roads or other uses. The person who owns a piece of land might not want to put solar on it, right?
But it's still 3 times in 3 counties.
But still, just to give a sense of scale. and so just RPC, just Bennington has 14,000 acres that are, there's no level 1 or 2 constraints, and that would add, and is within a mile of a three-phase power line. And I'll show a map of that in a moment. So this is my transition. Just, we're not always going to be able to see this key when I load up the other document. But this is just sort of generally what it looks like. They've just marked as white anything that was just not, that had no solar potential, or was one of these first few sets of the class 1 and 2 wetlands, runoff pools, river corridors, et cetera. And then where there are level 2 constraints of various sorts, agricultural soils, habitat blocks, that overlap with solar potential, they colored them. So you can sort of see like that's an area that would be good solar except for one of these reasons. And so what's left in yellow is what they call prime solar potential land. And I'll load up the PDF now if you all will bear with me. We can zoom in enough that you can see some of the scale here, but you can see generally this is the sort of the southwesterly 6 towns in Vermont. And some towns are just, they're forested, they're hilly, they're not great solar, so there's just not going to be a whole lot of solar. Likely, they're easy to site, easy to work with solar in Glastonbury. There may be more in Shaftesbury, right? It's going to vary by where the resources are. So I'll open the PDF for this. This map will be slightly different in that there's a distinction between orange and yellow. Yellow now in this case is restricted to just the stuff that's within a mile of a three-phase power line, and orange is everything that's otherwise prime solar but is further from power line. I want to figure out how to zoom in.
You can get rid of that right-hand stuff too.
So here's Bennington. The orange lines are three-phase power lines. So you can see that like in this area going through here, there's yellow on either side and orange further from the power line. This is actually a transmission line, and so it doesn't count. It's not as easy to plug in. So just to say that the kind of analysis can be done, even on this scale, even a relatively small yellow dot is itself already likely several acres in size. Right?
Can you give us a point of reference here? Where exactly are we looking?
No, I can only zoom in. This is Pownell. So the absolute lowest.
Okay.
Southeasterliest corner of Vermont. Just indication of the kind of analysis that can be done. Obviously, as one point, there's already stuff on some of this land. The landowner may not be amenable to solar on their land, et cetera. But just to say, like, where is it? And also recognize that there probably is actually good solar site that's on a soil of statewide significance that's been removed from this, but might actually be a fine solar site. So there may actually be more than this. It's a clarifying question.
Just a clarifying question. In that first list of what was exempted from the available acreage, I saw federal wilderness areas as well as conserved lands.
Right.
And I know of several projects that have been built on conserved lands, number one. Number two, did that take into account, so that considered state forests, state parks, other public resources such as town forests available for solar installation?
I don't know.
Okay.
The RPC folks who did the GIS would be able to answer one of their what exactly is sort of in and out and what. So this is just data in many respects. It's just, this is what the state looks like when you take the stuff away and count up acres. It's not a proposal about where solar should be or not be, but just in terms of the sense of scale, you think at the high end, 12,000 acres, you're trying to find the right place generally to figure out how to put 12,000 acres or 30 or maybe 350 acres a year-ish pace of development in around the state somehow. Right? What does that look like? What are the tools we have to shape that? How to make that sort of come out well in a way that works for a month.
Thank you. I think we're out of pretty much just over time. You did a great job. I think this really is helpful in terms of putting into context the scale of what we're looking at and versus the scale of the lands potentially available. I do want to point out that the department is sponsoring this research with the RPCs. We're doing 3 this year, and Bennington was one of them. And we expect that information to come in December or so, and we're planning on doing more next year. So I think we've got a tool in place now to try and have the regional planning commissions get up to speed on what implementation of the energy plan might look like.
Add one thing about the RPC piece. One is that the folks who live in Dorset or Rupert, right? They know that field, right? And they have, so the RPC folks are taking these maps and this analysis to the towns and talking with them about, all right, so given this, what works for you? Is there some other plot of land that is actually great for solar, but which didn't meet one of these constraints? Is there, which of the areas on this map that's yellow is the best for you, and how do you actually use that in a planning context and process? So. I think the first meeting that the Bennington folks are having on that topic is tonight. So this is an ongoing active thing, going beyond just data to planning.
And so this is in response to some concerns to be more deliberative and inclusive in where we're citing this. So we're being proactive, not reactive.
Clarifying question?
Well, yeah, I would like to know if this is going to be done with all regional planning commissions or just these 3.
As I just said, we're trying to do them all. It costs quite a bit of money, and we're trying to phase them in, but we're trying to get to them all.
Chris, is it possible for us, anyone here, to get a PDF?
Yes, sorry. What is the, do the RPCs interact with A&R and AG to try to refine some of those criteria?
Yeah. We've had meetings, the RPCs have met with the mapping folks and the criterion folks in the state agencies to understand these layers and how to use them and what they mean and which ones, they have discussions about which ones to consider to be level 1 constraints, which ones are level 2 constraints, et cetera.
And just adding from A&R, there's a level of complexity that isn't reflected here, which is that with wetlands, the starting point is the map wetlands, but once you actually walk the land, you might find something different. That's the same with deer wintering areas; they change. But this is a really good starting point. It just means that this kind of map ultimately can't be relied on as a red light, green light. It still will require work on the ground.
Right, you couldn't just go to the A&R website, take your data layers from there and say, and come up with an answer.
Right,
Clearly,
it's the starting point, not the end point.
But that's probably what they did. They did
That's
probably
what
go
they
to,
did.
yeah.
They used FileFinder and
Yes.
mapping.
Sure.
From a planning standpoint, this is pretty exciting, and I think it's going to be very useful. My question is, how does the department envision it being used, given that a lot of the siting decisions are made outside of the permitting process? So could it be a form of pre-screening that's included in the plans, or?
Well, I guess I'll answer this by saying the first use of it would be, I think, for developers to start actually having some reference to look at within a town before they just decide that they're going to point A or B. So I think that's right up front will be the most useful. But I think it will be used, regional plans are used in the permitting process now and will continue to be. And the better they get, the more they'll be able to be used.
One of the data layers that might be useful down the road, there is this initiative to create a statewide parcel map too. So we'd be looking not just at for large areas, but how it might affect specific properties on the ground.
Any other questions for Lisa from the group?
I'm gonna go try to write a conference.
Right, now he's gonna go right.
Great document.
Thank you, that was,
Yeah, thank you.
that was hugely helpful. Aaron?
Even I could.
Excellent, that's good. We will have the presentation to you, Sam. Oh, good. Yep, great. Aaron, where'd she go? You want to sit? Okay, so moving right along, David, thank you for offering to kind of give us some perspective from the aesthetics point of view. I'll let you introduce yourself. We are a few minutes behind, so if we can catch up a little bit, and try to build some buffer in here. So.
Yeah, I think I'll be very brief. I think, in offering these for discussion for the first time, obviously, I think people would want some time to digest these ideas, and these were developed, in conversation with the guidance of Anne and the department as they were developed. Just a little background on myself. I've been involved with aesthetics since probably the beginning of my career. Was trained in aesthetic review as a graduate student. Remember sitting in the office with Governor Dean many years ago when the power line went down across the causeway in Route 2, and the governor saying, that power line will not come back up, right, David? And that sort of started off my career and understanding the importance of aesthetics in the state and elsewhere. In full disclosure, our company, Landworks, works for solar developers, wind energy developers. We also work for the DPS, still doing some work on the Addison County natural gas project, worked on for solar developers, wind energy developers. We also work for the DPS, still doing some work on the Addison County natural gas project, worked on, besides PV20, a number of other projects. We're also consultants to the state of Maine in aesthetics and land use related to energy development. And I teach aesthetics at the university. My students are happy they're getting off this morning because this is class time. But and then finally, I think just as a in total disclosure, I myself have a solar array on my house. I'm part of a net metering system, and I was talking with Robert just a couple days ago. Our town is perhaps going to host a community scale solar energy project in the near future. So I've sat on all sides of the table, also working for citizens and municipalities in trying to get their hands around things like community standards. Without going through this step by step, I just sort of sat back and thought, what are these trying to get at, and what are some of the concerns that we've heard over time about siting, about aesthetics, about land use. And I kind of came up with 4 overarching thoughts, if you will, starting with design. And as you can see, location, 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 and you just heard Dr. Hopkins talk about site suitability, and I think the RPC project is absolutely fantastic as a point of departure for understanding suitability. But every site is different, and certainly to Noel's comments a few minutes ago, looking for sites that are fit for these types of projects, I think, is very important. And so the notion of brownfields and parking lots and areas that aren't as sensitive, perhaps, in terms of agriculture or scenic quality, certainly is a point of departure. However, one of the other comments I'm going to make in terms of an overarching way to look at where we are is in terms of transition. And if you think of design, it's very easy to see how we as humans have created rectangular blocks on the landscape, particularly in Vermont, with our farm fields. And perhaps we could see this right now as a time when we are transitioning to a new, what I call a new energy landscape, a landscape where we are seeing wind energy being located on ridgelines, solar farms being built in agricultural fields, things of that nature are coming to the fore, and it may be that in 30 years from now, and certainly my students are growing up with a sense that here in Vermont we're taking responsibility for energy generation, and that's why we're seeing rectangular blocks now of solar arrays in the farm fields or elsewhere in the state. So if you look at it from a design perspective, human geometry on the landscape can take many forms, whether they are natural forms that have been cut and reconfigured for human use, or the forms that energy generation and transmission take. One other key thing that has certainly come up under the heading of design is the sort of the art and science of screening, if you will. And while the new act has set forth some basic screening standards, which I think are a good start, I think it's also important, perhaps from a landscape architectural perspective, to recognize that one size, one technique does not fit all approaches, and that screening standards need to recognize the nuances and the context of the site. Context is a word that I use a lot with my students. It's derived from the Latin, which means to weave together, and how these projects are woven into the fabric of our landscape, I think, is very, very important, along with overall scale. Process, I think, as we move ahead and we get into the Queechee analysis, which is our tool, and which I think is becoming more robust with every decision and the more input of local concerns as well as statewide information about our energy needs. There are a couple of issues certainly that continually are brought up. One is certainly how do we define the average person? And in Maine, it's referred to as the typical viewer. And the average person, I kind of had to look this up really. An average person is a typical, common, representative individual who perhaps is midway between extremes. In our work, I think, and is established perhaps before the PSB and other bodies, the typical viewer, the average person, is someone who is disinterested from the get-go. In other words, they do not have a vested interest in the project one way or another, and may not come at the project if they're asked with a predisposed attitude. In other words, being for or against the project, because that naturally colors a viewer's or a person's perspective. Just like a neighbor who might be next door to a project is not an average person. Having said that, it is important to recognize that neighbors and neighborhoods are changed and potentially impacted by these projects, and so we have to find a better way, or continue our effort to incorporate the concerns of the neighbor and the neighborhoods with some of these projects, certainly. Having said that, I also think it's very important to understand that when we do aesthetic review, when I say we, those of us who are charged as professionals to do this, and I'm sure Mitch might want to weigh in on this, our primary focus has to be the public realm. By virtue of just the reality that we can't go to everybody's house and find out or look at what a project might change in that view or in that situation. That's, again, as I said, not to discount neighborhoods and neighbors, and there has to be a way to recognize their interests. But generally speaking, our charge is to look at the public realm and the public resources, and to understand what the impacts are going to be, or the effects are going to be, to those resources. That then segues into the notion of community standards, and another thing that we've certainly spent some time thinking about and talking about, and which is embedded in the Queechee analysis. I believe that no municipality should be able to enact an outright ban on solar energy in that community, but a community should be able to exercise the opportunity to implement standards and guidance, as well as identify those places that are precious and really should not be altered or affected by projects of this nature. Adam Uji from ACRPC, I think, has made a very good step towards providing guidance to communities with to embed into their plans and zoning in that regard, and I think that's also an important point of departure that you should all be looking at. Then we get into that notion of balance. Speaking of the public realm, we as a culture, we as a society, I believe, have to balance that need to provide public infrastructure with the need to protect our public realm that is scenic and that we value. A very important distinction has to be made, and this is an issue we face everywhere we go in the Northeast. And right now I'm working in New York, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Pennsylvania on projects. And everyone in every one of those states and every one of the locations believe their little piece of God's green earth is absolutely exceptional, is absolutely at a high scenic level. It's a very hard thing for us to get our arms around, but I believe Vermont has sort of an everyday scenic value that we all appreciate and cherish, but then there's a higher level of scenery that exists. And many of those places have been put into a standard, if you will, by virtue of their conservation or their designation as wilderness areas or scenic areas or sensitive areas. And that is another thing that really does need to be considered, that the public realm and where it is going to hold our infrastructure to achieve our goals in the future for energy reliance, and where it's going to protect those values and that landscape character that we all hold dear. So there is that notion of balance. There's also a balance between the rights of the property owner and or neighbor with the rights of the developer, who may be in fact a property owner. And this is a state, as we know, that has placed a value on individual property rights. So where does that balance work? And then I think finally, as I kind of mentioned before in terms of transition, the change that we're experiencing now is certainly difficult for us to accept. It's a hard thing. We all feel that what we've bought and where we live is in some respects what our expectations are, and it's often difficult to accommodate a major change. And I'll just quickly use my own experience in that regard. I live in a farming community, 600 people, 2,000 cows, now maybe 3. We have now a new large farm in our town, and I live across from a piece of land and an old derelict barn that has now been taken over by this large farm. And many times during the day, I have constant truck traffic going past my house, back and forth, as they take crops and silage to their barn. That's been a change which has sort of upset, if you will, my everyday life to some extent. But I recognize that's part of the balance and part of the change that we have to accept. If we want agriculture, then we need to, and open spaces that those provide, we need to accept the other impacts or activities that go with that. The last piece I just would mention is, again, the sort of the notion of the balance in information. Finally, I think a key element that we all need to consider, and that's why what Dr. Hopkins was providing in the RPC project is excellent, is sort of a public clearinghouse for information we all agree is right and factual and true. Because in every project there's always sort of dueling fact bases, if you will, and folks who say this is true and others who say no, our studies show this is true, or the like. And so providing a clearinghouse where information about the impact on property values, the effect on tourism is something that always comes up in Vermont, would be, I think, valuable if all of us can agree that certain informations from objective sources are reliable and can provide a point of departure for us to understand when we cite a project what the potential effects of that project might be over time. So those are just sort of overarching comments that...
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we're pretty much out of time. That. Let me just ask if there are any questions from the folks. Task force members.
And I don't know if this is a question or maybe a follow-up. I think what would be really helpful is what have communities done, specific guidance, not on pros and cons and facts and, but things like robust, successful community interaction. Solar aesthetic guidance that has been very successful and implemented in communities. So this type of screening versus this type of screening. I think that would, those kind of really concrete examples, I think would help us as we're thinking about what would be helpful and good tools for communities, how to engage people so they feel like they're involved. I think ACES was really great because he provided us a great framework.
Right.
I think those kind of specifics would really help us.
Yes, and at the end of this document, one of the closing comments is the need for case studies, is the need to look at projects well done, and what communities have done that is working in terms of providing that guidance that you recommend, Noel. I couldn't agree with that more.
You referenced the Queechy test, and the Public Service Board has put its own spin on that in terms of the societal benefit provision. And maybe that's for another discussion, but in terms of a planner who's working on community standards, it's raised a big question mark on how we deal with that aspect of the test, or whether,
Yes, and I think that, we, for example, and to Noel's comment, we work with the town of Shelburne post-NRP, which is the Northwest Reliability Project, where Shelburne had to get its arms around a new transmission project going through the heart of their town to develop and identify those elements that they hold dear in their town and that they want to have considered, if not respected, in a review process. So I think the whole question of community standards is a good one. It's not enough to say all our town roads are scenic, and therefore any project that has visibility from the town roads is going to have an unacceptable impact, because it really has to go through, I think, again, a robust community planning process in which the community develops consensus, again with the recognition that there is this balance between our need as a town to host our fair share of the facilities with those elements and characters in our town that we want to protect in order to maintain that sense of place and that feel we have for our town. So I think more work on community standards needs to be done. I think one of the challenges right now is that all of us, my town included, are seeing these projects being proposed, and we haven't had enough time to really vet that notion of community standards and identify what we do hold dear and where we would want projects to be cited.
And I guess, just as a follow-up to, and you mentioned that you're really looking at the public good and the overall societal benefit seems to be able to even if there is an undue impact, that overall societal benefit can still overrule.
Well, and of course, as you know, that's the PSB's stated, kind of goal is to weigh those benefits and costs, and if they determine that the benefit, obviously, that would accrue from the project outweighs aesthetic costs or potential neighbor costs, if you will, then that project should go forward. And that's why I think we have an overarching state body to make these decisions. If it would be up to each town, it might be very difficult to site projects or to build transmission lines.
So I think that this was, thank you, David. This was intended to really just be a tee-up of the introduction of one criterion, the aesthetics piece of this that's of concern. And we'll get into more about how it actually works or doesn't as we go through this. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank
This
you.
document's on the website.
Great.
Which goes into greater detail.
Yep.
And I'd be happy for folks to provide comments, and I'd be happy to come back at another time.
Thanks.
Field.
Probably take you up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the public comments section of this, and I've got a list where people have checked off. Some people put X's. I'm interpreting that as they want to talk. So if I call your name and you don't want to, that's okay. But I've got about 10 people that seem to want to say something, and we've got about 15 minutes. I'm gonna crunch our back end side here, so if people could just speak for a minute or two, that would be great, and we'll go from there. The first is Peter Rothschild.
Hi.
Hi, Peter.
I'd like to speak to this from a political perspective. Those of you at the table, I hope you know what an iron triangle is. I'm looking at one, okay? This room, by the way, is a great metaphor for a football game. We've got a football field. We've got the visiting team over there, home team over here. And the question is, who are the refs? And if you look at the political donations, the relationship between agencies, interest groups, and legislators, this is an iron triangle straight out of Washington. So you guys on the committee have a extra onerous job to do this right. I've read the report from a siting committee in 2012, which was unimpressive at best. And while it was vague, nothing was done. So I just urge you to be aware that there are a lot of people who feel that in the communities that they're left out of this process. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Leonard?
Yes. I'm going to have to read because I'm not very good at memorizing. I'm here today as a concerned citizen on my own time and expense, representing a rapidly growing majority of Vermonters who are just waking up to the fact that our countryside is being overwhelmed by unrestrained industrialization. I'd like to make a couple of points about what needs to be done to protect Vermont's unique landscape, the one that we've been nurturing for decades. First, it is time to stop using the deceitful term solar farm, and another one I heard today, green fields. Obviously dreamed up by some slick PR firm, especially in official discourse. Industrial solar plants are not by any stretch of the imagination farms. In fact, they are the absolute antithesis of any common definition of a farm. As a land use, they are very much more akin to the strip mines that have decimated Appalachia than anything else resembling a Vermont farm, although strip mines are not as permanent. Secondly, any solar plant approval must include locked-in escrow funds for mandated herbicide-free maintenance and future decommissioning to be set aside from the front-end subsidies and tax breaks. A decommissioning date certain must be based on the realistic projected useful life of the technology, after which demolition and restoration of the land must be guaranteed. Wall Street's cashing in on our generous subsidies, extorted from Vermont ratepayers, and exploiting our farmland because it is cheap and expedient, and the front-end subsidies are highly profitable. These investors need to be held accountable. Thirdly, all solar developments should, at the very least, be subject to the same standards established by Act 250 and local ordinances as they are applied to any other industrial, commercial, or extractive development. And finally, as a professional architect and land planner, and who's also been on both sides of the fence as a local and regional planning commission chair, I'm not convinced that it is even possible to negate the negative impact of these large-scale projects by simply imposing stricter siting standards. One case in point that I am familiar with is the Hinsdale Power Plant in Charlotte, which only because of significant local opposition was required to be set well back from the road, includes some required deciduous screening. Far more landscaping mitigation than has been applied to most such projects. Yet it remains a major eyesore, highly visible, especially in winter. It appears from a mile away like the roof of a gigantic metal factory, significantly devaluing surrounding properties and permanently destroying a previously unspoiled viewshed. Such large-scale destruction cannot be mitigated. This is not a landscaping issue. It's a public policy problem. Therefore, I strongly recommend that a moratorium be immediately imposed on any additional industrial solar arrays on open farm or forest land in Vermont, at least until every single urban rooftop and parking lot in the state is completely saturated with maximum efficiency collectors. We heard that today, that that's possible. We need a moratorium now. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like I'm up to John.
I'm over here.
There you are.
David Raphael just gave the same ridiculous definition of an average citizen that you hear all the time. And then it has to be a disinterested person. It's kind of like when you're selling something. It has to be somebody who doesn't really need to buy it, being sold by somebody who doesn't really need to sell it, which is just as ridiculous. And then he gets to the point where he says that if we go by what the people who live right there are saying, we probably wouldn't be putting too many of these in. Which kind of brings to the belief that it's not a definition of who is an average citizen, but when they are an average citizen. We were an average citizen in Newark until a developer sneaks on in for over a year before it's mentioned to the town. That was wind, it wasn't solar, but same theory. So it's not who is an average citizen, it's when you're an average citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Keith.
Hi. Well, first of all, we had an individual here who talked about addressing environmentally sensitive areas, mapping, agricultural areas, prime soils. What nobody mentioned, and I don't even think this would be covered by it, right now there's a half a dozen 20 megawatt solar projects that are planned for the state. There's a hillside in Barton. It's forested, and I don't even think it would come under any of these, as far as habitat or environmentally sensitive area. I don't even think that is on that map. So you have a 300-acre forested hillside that most of it would have to be clear cut for a 20 megawatt project. And I think that's got to be considered also. That's just for starters. I also feel that if a company comes in and wants to propose a project, I don't understand, if it's for the public good, why any type of data that's collected as far as energy potential is not open to the public. It's like it's a secret. And I'll give you an example. On the Sheffield project, the developer talked around 30 to 33% output, plate capacity, and in reality, you check with ISO New England. Don't go to First Wind, because they'll tell you something different. I should say Sun Edison now. It's been sold a couple times. You're going to get a totally different answer. The answer is somewhere in the low to mid 20s, not 30 to 33%. And then one more thing I'd like to say: if the decision of this committee goes the same route as what happened a couple years ago with the Wind Siting Commission, and it gets to Tony Klein and the Energy Committee, in the past, all he's done is just sit on it. Is he going to sit on it again for the lobbyists that are parked in his office? Or is he actually going to do something? I just feel he's either disconnected, or he personally told me he doesn't believe that anyone is going to clear cut their land to put up solar panels. He doesn't believe anyone's going to put them on agricultural soil. And he also told me personally, in fact he said it publicly, that don't worry, there will be no more wind projects proposed, so we don't need to do anything on siting for industrial wind. And then one other thing I'd like to say is we need to also consider health concerns, health effects on people living near these projects. As you know, in Sheffield and in Lowell, nothing has been done yet. There's people that can't sleep at night, they're sick, people have been forced out of their homes. That needs to be addressed. And I guess that's it. I just think this is some of the heaviest, most intense development pressure that will be levied on the state of Vermont in recent history. And there's no Act 250 review. There's no clear-cut law that applies, Act 15. And the Environmental Court has been removed by the individual I just mentioned, the chair of the Energy Committee. So what happens here? Should there be certain situations where a project's big enough where the Environmental Court should at least kick in, and possibly Act 250? I mean, where's the limit here? 5 megawatts, 20 megawatts? And I hope something would be mentioned on wind.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Kathleen, we need to be a little briefer than we're going to run out of time. Thank you.
This siting task force, when it started out, was poor. There's no public advocacy on the task force, which means it's unbalanced, which means it lacks credibility. Since the first meeting, it's gone downhill. The first meeting, I believe Gabrielle Stebbins said that she wanted to put one of her Rev lawyers on this task force to advise you on legal matters in case they came up. This task force should not be receiving any legal advice from a developer's lawyer. And I objected very much to having Rev place a lawyer on this task force. Mr. Recchia is entitled to designate an appointee and has the option to designate a public advocate, like Jeff Collins, onto this board. And you could do that with the express direction that his first primary goal is to advocate for the public, second for the department, and last for the administration. I believe a piece of paper I sent you right here, right now, had to do with the Energy Siting Commission, where you were questioned on public advocacy by Senator Hartman. Okay, I'm sitting right behind you, Mr. Rector. Okay, and he pretty much admits that your public advocacy department works for the administration. We need public advocacy on here. There's a new individual, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Swanson used to worked almost 10 years for Rev. Does that mean we now have 2 individuals from Rev on the department, on this task force? He also worked for the Community Environmental Defense Fund and was arranging $5.8 million out to the renewable energy and efficiency industries. This task force is devoted to promoting the industry with absolutely no public advocacy at all. Mr. Raphael.
Okay, Kathleen, we're
all right, I got one more
okay.
thing. All right.
Just asking you to do
It's
that.
about him, okay? It's on the paper that I sent you around. Mr. Raphael wrote what he said here. For Green Mountain Power in the docket, which has been absorbed by the Public Service Board as policy. That policy is to prohibit the public from commenting on aesthetics, an energy generation siting. So now we have proof here that the developers are dictating policy that excludes the public. This task force needs to be halted until you people here can get a balance between the industry and the public. Thank you.
Bob
It's Emmeline.
Ameling, sorry.
Thank you.
Ameling.
I'd like to first ask if this task force is going to consider the interconnection costs for solar projects. As solar is added to the electric grid, the grid has to be upgraded to handle this interconnection. And there are differences among regions. There's a tremendous variety in the type of distribution circuits among the distribution circuits in Vermont. There's a tremendous size difference in length. And I would wonder if the department is going to make this part of the topics that are looked at, because there can be a lot of money that needs to be spent to upgrade certain circuits.
So to speed things along, I will say that is considered, that is the developer's costs when those occur, those are identified through the Public Service Board process. So
I know they're developing costs, but this is another way of putting the thumb on the scale, because what's happening is we're putting these projects concentrated in certain areas.
Yeah.
Developers may be paying that, but shouldn't we be promoting more rooftop solar, where we're distributing that? And I just would like to bring that up as
Yep.
an issue.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Chris? Larry?
I'm gonna pass it this point.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Looks like Bob Eastwood?
Ben.
Ben, Ben. It says Ben.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I want to change up the tone of the public comment. I'm a resident of Montpelier. I do share a lot of the concerns with large-scale industrial projects, with wind, with some of these larger solar projects, and sort of lack of transparency in the community process and the lack of ownership that communities are given. However, I think that we need to also be aware that our energy future is such that it's not a matter of a clean field, a perfect view shed, or a solar panel. It's a matter of a solar installation or another bio incinerator plant, or another coal plant, or some other technology that's going to be more polluting. And I think community solar and home solar is a really good niche in between here, where we can address a lot of these issues with with these bigger installations by having a more community-based process. A community solar array, we don't have a big corporation coming in, issuing gag orders, taking people's rights away. We have communities working together to cite a project that will benefit them, that they have control over and retain control over. And I think that we need to really focus on that scale. It's a matter of scale. I think as a state, we're very vulnerable. We have a very vulnerable energy portfolio right now that's dependent on outside production. Canadian corporations control 70% of our utilities at this point through Gaz Metro. Hydro-Quebec, Gaz Metro owns Green Mountain Power, right? Hydro-Quebec produces a huge portion of our energy profile. So we're in a lot of ways in a situation similar to where we were as a country in the 1970s, where we were at the whim of OPEC. Now we're at the whim of these outside big corporations. I think the reality is we need to be more self-reliant, and we need to decide and have an honest discussion about what we're going to do. And that can only really happen if we have a very robust community involvement. And I think the best niche for that is through community scale, community solar projects, and community energy projects. I have a written statement I'd like to just add as testimony and shorten my speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate it. Okay, Gabrielle Stubbins.
I just wanted to correct the record regarding Sam Swanson. He never worked for REV. He was on the REV board. He has not been on the board, though, for several years.
Well, thank you. I will just say, in general, there are a lot of personal statements that aren't true, but I can't respond to all of them. So we just let people approach this the way they wish to. So, okay, we got a few minutes to talk about other meetings and topics and schedules.
You went right over the top of me.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, oh, XX, yes, but yes in between. Sorry, Jill. Go ahead.
No problem, I appreciate it. I've been very patient.
Yes, you have.
I spend a lot of time outdoors. I'm an avid horseback rider and spend 6 or more hours in the saddle, or up to 6 hours at times riding through the beautiful mountains. You can probably tell by the color of my face, and public speaking tends to make it a little more red. So I am all for renewable energy, and last time I was here I spoke about responsibility, and that I was happy to see this task force come together and somebody at least trying to be responsible. I don't know whether to be really angry or cry. I'm feeling both of those emotions and many, many more. I've been opposing a 20-acre array in my backyard in an agricultural field, and several more, at least There's one in now, one they want to put in 20 acres, and then there's 2 more planned right in my neighborhood. So this is my fight since July. And we've just hired an aesthetic consultant, 3 neighbors and the town of New Haven, and it's taking $750 out of our pocket just for that piece of this. I have not wanted to learn legislature, and I don't want to fight, but I will to the finish. It causes arguments in household, neighborhoods, stress, strain. My heart rate is through the roof right at this moment. I think it causes health concerns, both mental and physical. And I don't want to be here. I mean, it's a gorgeous day outside. I'd rather be out riding my horses, enjoying these beautiful mountains of Vermont. This is just the schedule of opposing this array in my backyard since July. Petitioner's motion for reconsideration. Site visit, public hearing. Deadline for motions to intervene. Deadline for parties' comments on motions to intervene, and petitioner's motion for reconsideration. First round of discovery on the petitioner due. Petitioner response to first discovery due. Second round of discovery on the petitioner due. Petitioner response to second round of discovery due. Filing of memorandum of understanding, MOUs. Non-MOU parties file testimony, pre-filed testimony. Discovery served on non-MOU parties pre-filed testimony. Non-MOU parties file response to discovery. Rebuttal pre-filed testimony and exhibits by any party. Technical hearing. I have to become my own lawyer. Briefs by the parties and reply to briefs. How many of you would get involved in something like that to protect your property and your green space? I say shame on Shumlin for putting us all through this. Again, back to responsibility. I was speaking to the developer that wants to put this 20 acres in my backyard, and I said, Fair and Field Days is right down the street. Why don't you become the hero? Go show the public how Vermont's largest agricultural fair can coexist with solar, reinforce those buildings, put solar on every rooftop, and show the coexistence. Called me the next morning, wanted me to go into business with him. He thought that was a great idea. I should have asked him if I did that, will he drop the 20 acres in my backyard, but I didn't. So, I mean, if we must use fields, these are commercial businesses, and they should stay in the commercial areas. Again, I agree with whoever over here said saturate every rooftop. I think that needs to be done. People don't want their green space gone, and tourists do not want to come and see fields of solar. So I'll continue to fight to the finish and try to keep this array out of my backyard, and please listen to every word that the public says, and think about if there was 20 acres in their backyard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so now, let's look at the time. Excellent, 8 minutes. Next meeting schedules and things that we want to have covered. What I'll say is we've given this a little thought and think that, basically between now and December, we've got to cover 3 things. We started today. We got to understand the scope of the magnitude of the issue. Then we got to understand the problems or concerns that people have and get perspectives on that, and how developers think about siting in the context of that, so we can answer those questions about what the public is concerned about. I'd like to, hopefully we made a list. We probably all have them of people we'd like to hear from. I'm thinking VLCT needs to be heard from. The RPCs need to be heard from. The general public, the developers. Then we need to have a period of time when we can actually focus on debating what we want to do about all this. And then we need a third thing of presenting a report and legislation, all by really December 15th, thereabouts. So that was my introduction by way of saying I don't think once a month is going to work. entirely and wondered what people's appetite was for maybe once every couple of weeks meeting and making sure that we get, if we can set a firm time that everybody knows, like if Thursdays work for people, 10 to 12, we can make that a permanent kind of every 2-week thing. And then really work on, with my help of my staff, we'll work on developing agendas and teeing those things up efficiently so that people are, we're getting the most use of the time that we have. But I just throw that out and wonder what are people's reactions to that. Well,
I'm not gonna go to reaction for every 2 weeks. It's whatever you need to have done to have a robust process, I'll be there. But in terms of just people speaking, I think it would be really great if we could just, because I'm not in this world every day, I'm in the community planning world, so I understand that piece. But it would be really helpful in each of those areas that you laid out to have people come in and talk about kind of groups of facts. So from the developers, what are they looking for? What are their, so when they look for solar siting, what are some of the issues they see? And then from communities, what are they seeing in terms of the rubs and concerns there? And I think that would just be more helpful for us to see the landscape of issues and say, okay, here's our recommendations, or here's where everyone meets, and this is a higher priority. I mean, for me right now, after the second meeting, I don't have enough information, and it would just be helpful to make sure that when whoever presents comes with a 1-page of top priority, here's what really works, here's what we can make work, and here's really where we have stumbling blocks. And I think that would just help us, see where everyone can come together and where we might have to have rubs and make those recommendations. And another meeting room. It would just be I think we need a different
I think we need to
configuration.
go to a different, bigger area somewhere. Although it's useful to have the phone and the screen, so we'll have to figure that out. I know there are other places, National Life, we may ask for your guys' help with this next meeting.
Can I make one request or comment about scheduling and as far as public access to meetings? And just that it's really hard for a lot of working people to get in here at 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think that this is going to be an issue, and I think this is a really great opportunity to start the public comment, like being on a really good foundation of transparency. And like what the legislature did with the GMO hearings and stuff, is it possible that we could do an afternoon or evening meeting at some point for public comment?
We're going to talk about those things once we figure out schedule, timing, location. One of the questions I had is whether we should move meetings around, or whether that is more complicated than it's worth. But thank you. Yeah, I think that's a legitimate thing for us to talk about. So, any other thoughts on scheduling or meetings, frequency?
I would just add that VLCT, VPA, and DAPTA, we've already kind of said we'd agree to do a brief presentation on kind of the 117 planning aspects of this with probably with DHCA too, DHCD, if that would be helpful.
It would be helpful, and the two things that are teed up now are based on our conversation last time, but obviously we need to break them up into meetings. We still wanted, and we are prepared at the next meeting to talk about the differences and similarities between Act 250 and Section 248. That's on the list, and this would be another good topic that I think will play in there. So, all right, so we got the next meeting agenda, but we don't have the schedule yet.
Do we want to look at maybe Thursday, the 8th of October, so it's not 2 weeks, but it's 3 weeks out?
Okay.
And that might give everyone.
You're not here, Chris.
Thanks. Okay, let's do that. I'm not here on the 8th either.
I can't do afternoon.
Okay, so, yep, so.
So there you go.
Yeah, Chris, I think that given how many people are on the task force, I'm not sure that sticking with the same day of the week is going to be
Okay.
It's just going to be really finding a date that works each time.
All right, let's do this. Let's pick a next meeting so that everybody here knows when it can be. And then doodle poll the rest, okay?
Chris, we also have a paper chart we could hand out of possible dates for folks to do. We could also do the doodle poll, whichever you prefer. So.
We can do anything, whatever's easier for everybody. I do have this, but then with availabilities, I don't have current forms.
I think since we're out of time, that filming it out here won't work, so I think we're back to the doodle poll idea. Yeah, but let's just figure out.
We just have to promise, because I know this is an issue, we just have to promise that when we get the email, we will promptly fill out the doodle poll.
But the week, so as the week you're shooting for would be the week that, of the October 5th.
Well, yeah, we started with, in 2 weeks was the first, and then, or the week of the 5th.
Okay.
But I am in North Carolina for the first few days of that week.
It's like Wednesday the 30th. It's in the afternoon.
And definitely can't do that day, I'm like double booked already.
Okay, so we've
I
got
think we'd look at October 2nd as a possibility, Chris, or early October, if that could work for folks.
Friday the 2nd available? Nope.
So we'll have to send it out.
Okay, all right, we're out of time, and we'll have to figure it out, and we'll notify everybody of the next meeting based on the sign-up sheets and obviously the task force members. If you want to receive things by email, please do sign up if you haven't already. And thanks, everybody. Is there what? Yeah, we'll do that. Yep. Thank you. Moved by seconded by Adam. All those in favor? Okay. Thank you, everybody.